Today we're talking about all things Ease Focus 3, the free professional sound system production software that you can run on your computer today. I'm going to show you where to get it, how to set up a file, all the menus, how to navigate, all of its layout, the properties, everything you need to know to make sure you're going to be off to a great start when designing a file. It's a little confusing at first, but I'll be your guide walking you through everything you need to know to make sure your first session goes well. We're even going to build one from scratch at the very end with everything we had learned. If you're into sound system design and watching this, you're probably going to love my Audio Math Survival spreadsheet. Is available at the link below or at producedbymkc.com/audio toolkit. It's a 250-row calculator that has all sorts of handy stuff that can get you real results and make sure your systems are sounding fantastic. It's a great way to practice, a great way to get these concepts in your brain and so you can wrap your head around it. One that we use today in our session is that in the session that we're going to set up, we have an 80-foot deep by 60-foot deep audience. And this gives us a ratio of depth to width of 1.33. There's a fun calculation that we can run, and that gives us what is the nominal coverage angle of the speaker that we need to cover the audience that we have in front of us. So I have that right here. All you got to put in is your depth and width, and that gives you the degree angle speaker that you need. Today I'm using the HDL6As from RCF, and that's a 100-degree speaker, so that's just over 97 degrees. So I know that speaker is going to be wide enough to take care of the audience I have on the show today. We're going to jump into that into the file in just a little bit. Let's jump into all things Ease Focus 3, starting from where to get it, how does it work, and why you should invest time in learning this. What does Ease Focus 3 do for you? Why is it worth investing time and effort learning this software for your audio career? Well, it's a professional industry standard piece of software that helps make sure your systems, as you're preparing for a concert or a show or whatever you have in front of you, are going to do what you think they're going to do. So you're able to predict in advance how the system is going to behave and make accurate decisions about your trim heights, how many speakers you need, do you need more subs, can a line array do this, or is a point source better? So it helps you calculate and observe what's going to happen. And it's a great way to practice when you're apart from a real life environment and get used to how sound system design and that tuning workflow is going to work. Why Ease Focus 3 is great is that it's manufacturer agnostic from a speaker standpoint. So companies like QSC and RCF, products that I use all the time, they both have what's called a GLL file, a data set about a speaker that you can import into Ease Focus 3 and then make predictions based off of it all in the same sandbox. Other companies like Meyer, JBL, L Acoustics, D&B, all these big ones have their own proprietary software that's just for their products and their own workflow. This is great if you use these products all the time, but it's a lot to have to learn all these different ones if you're using these rigs all the time. So Ease Focus 3 makes it easy that it's the same tool set, the same sandbox, but manufacturers can contribute different files to each, so you have to learn one workflow. I still think Map 3D from Meyer is my favorite system design software just from all the features it offers you, but you need to learn Ease Focus 3 as well to understand fundamentals and start working with other manufacturers outside of those who have their own proprietary software. I will also say that it's free, so make sure and snag it and learn it. It won't cost you any bones. Here we are at AFMG's website. This is who makes Ease Focus 3. Their naming conventions on their products are a little bit weird. And so if you go to this tab, they have Ease, Ease Speaker Lab, Ease EVAC, and then Ease Focus. So that's where we're going to click if you go to the website. I'm at this page. So this is Ease Focus 3. It is a free download. Like I said earlier, they have other softwares that are fairly expensive, so don't get that. Get this one. Another one that I can do in a later video is the Ease GLL viewer. And so that's able to look at an individual GLL file in a vacuum, so you can look at that data before you plug it into a system design software. But we won't be covering that today. So you would click here and download Ease Focus 3. I will say it is PC or Windows only. So how I run that on my Mac is using a software called Parallels, which runs a virtual machine of Windows. There's also VMware, and you can just do a straight up boot disk on your Mac and make that happen as well. You can go to the resources page on AFMG's website and click manuals, and that's where it will bring you to the Ease Focus 3 user's guide. And I'll say it's really well done. It's not a thrilling read. There's not a bunch of inside jokes, but I'd say that the flow and format of it is great. It gets pretty esoteric near the end into advanced features, and we're not going to cover all that today. But as far as how to look at the project properties, the layout of it, which each tool and how it does it, it's very succinct, and they do a great job. So let's jump into the software, and we'll step into how to set everything up. I've got the software open now in Parallels, and I want to get us off to a good start by making sure we have the same project settings so we're looking at the same thing. You're going to go here to File, Options, and scroll down here to click on Environment. Make sure it's in English if you're speaking English today. The units are going to be in feet for me. It starts off in metric. So if you're across the pond, you can leave it over there, but since I live in the US, I use the imperial system. Don't worry about the gain grouping, but I will say go to Functionality, do Mode, and click Extended. It's going to boot up in Standard. Standard limits the feature set a little bit to make it not so overwhelming. I think you're smart. I think you can learn this quickly. So we're going to go ahead and jump to Extended so we can make sure and look at 90% of the feature set that you're going to use day in and day out with this software. And then click OK, and you'll have that. The main differences you're going to see are some more tabs down here and a couple other things different up here at the top. And we'll jump through all these toolbars, don't worry. Let's do a rundown of the GUI. What are we looking at here? In the center is our top view where we can look at from a bird's eye view our system. This is an audience plane or audience area or audience zone rather. I've got this as an individual speaker. They all show up as little squares, but we can see down here on our side view how it shows up. This is an HDL6A array, and I got some K12s on the floor and then a flown RCF sub. We'll jump through all that. So that's how I primarily keep this on top view. On the right hand side, we have rigging. So whatever speaker source I have selected, it'll look like that. I've clicked on this 6-box array, and you can see how all these little panes or windows interact with each other. I have this top box selected, and now we can see the top line right here lights up. So it's telling me, hey, this box with this line is what I'm looking at. So I like how the different panes interact with one another. This bottom view, they call it the side view section, but it also has a bunch of other data with it. We can look at our levels across our audience, the frequency response, time response, distribution graph, which we have to turn our mapping on. We'll come back to that. We can change any EQ filters in our global filter across the system. Here on the left is the project and object properties tab. So this is contextual, meaning it's going to change depending on what I click on. So if I click on this audience zone, it's going to show me how I named it, its orientation, its length and width, and I can show the elevations. If I click on a speaker or line array in this case, it's going to show me data and things I can edit about that. So I'd say most of the time you're going to be editing what's going on here on this object properties tab, and then going back, moving things around and resizing them here, and then looking at data here on the bottom, then looking at your rigging here on the right. That's the general flow of the information. We also have a project properties tab. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Let's look at our 4 object types. The first is an audience zone, which I've shown here. This is a 60-foot by 80-foot audience. The depth, it's always depth, then width. So I have 80 feet, 60 feet, and I can add an audience area within it. So if I wanted to subdivide the audience into maybe the first third, middle third, back third, or maybe it's a VIP section, this is always useful if you're in a stadium seating and there's like a 100, 200, 300 section. You don't have to draw 3 individual zones for that. You can subdivide them up. You also have sound sources. So this is the speakers that are making sound. So if I click on that, this shows me here a little K12. I've got that here. I have 3 K12 fill speakers here. I have an HDL6A rig in the air, then an 8004 sub from RCF. You also have receivers. So receivers are these little diamond guys that are colored and have numbers on them. So these collect data from the sound sources. So think of these almost like measurement microphones. So I've placed these out here, and most of the time I'm using them in regards to frequency response. So that shows me with this system, what is the frequency response at this given point relative to this specific receiver. Then you have a section plane. I have that here for the stage. I could click up here on this toolbar and add another little line. I've done that here and created a stage. This can be used as a visual aid to help measure something, maybe the distance from the front row to the line array. You can draw that in side view. Anyway, I use it here as the stage. And why I have done that is I don't want this as an audience area because no one's sitting there. And I don't want that to affect the other data I'm going to gather from what's going on. So this just gives me a set of boundaries and a visual reference without adding actual more audience areas or any more data that's going to muck up what's going on with my real audience. Here's the layout of a project and the coordinate system. So every project has an origin. So we all learned this in 7th grade algebra geometry. Right here, apart from these little rectangles, you see this X and Y right here. That is the origin. So that is 0, 0 of the project. I usually have this as my downstage center edge. We have X, Y, and Z coordinates. So if I look here in my side view and I select my flown HDL6A system, on the left-hand side, it is 1 foot upstage on my x-axis. It is dead center, so it's 0 on my y-axis. And then I have the flybar 25 feet in the air. So that's my Z height. So I would say you can move this origin if you want. I usually don't, but start with the downstage center. You also have what are called DZ coordinates, and these are unique to Ease Focus 3. I'm going to move my receiver here a little bit, and you can see on my audience zone this little arrow. And then here also, on the side view, this little arrow. This is the orientation of the audience. And then if I click on my HDL6A array again, go to the Levels tab, this bottometric D feet shows everything in reference to that 0 point of that specific object. So the 0 axis start is from that speaker in the X axis. It feels a little bit weird, but it's saying it's just resetting that graph, so I don't always have to do any math between if my array is really far back from my audience to have to offset that. It just says, hey, from this speaker forward is where we're going to look at, and that's the 0 point on the D data point. You always want your arrows pointed as your audience is facing toward the stage. Ease was built intuitively thinking that you're going to go from left to right. So speakers always from left point to right, then audiences point from right to left. And so that may feel backwards to you. You might want to do top to bottom, but this is how Ease wants you to do it. They're always going to have the arrows default to that way. So you can change them. I can click and drag the arrow and make it face different directions, but you're just going to be swimming upstream at that point. So make sure you're working from left to right as far as your speaker system out and audience facing right to left. Moving on to project properties. If I click down here on the left, I can name it. So this isn't actually going to name the file itself. I've just saved this as easetutorial_v1, but this is like the internal metadata within the project. You have the author, the company, and this is going to show up later in the system report. So you can have your internal versioning system, but this would be client facing if you wanted to send them that. So I want to just say awesome design v1. Put in my name and say for local festival this July, whatever. You're able to change the temperature. I usually do 72 degrees Fahrenheit because that makes the speed of sound a nice round number, 1130 feet per second. You can change the air pressure if you want. I usually leave this alone, and humidity. I would only change humidity if you know you're going to be outside and it's a super muggy day and it is going to affect some of your frequency response settings. Again, not a huge deal at the end of the day. I wouldn't lose any sleep over this if you didn't touch any of that at all. We click more on some project-specific settings. We could, here in the middle, adjust the ear heights. So when we make an audience zone, if we were to click on an audience zone, go back to our object properties, we have to determine the ear height of what's happening. So this is taking any of the measurements of where the receivers are going to sit on top of it as sitting or standing. So sitting by default, is at 3.94 feet, so just under 4, and then standing is 5.5. And you can have a custom height if you want. If let's say you're doing a show for a bunch of NBA players and you want it at 7 feet, that's fantastic. You can also set upper height limit for sound sources. So if you know in a specific venue you have a max trim height, you can put that here. Or if you have a lower trim height, which means you don't want any of your boxes hanging down into any sight lines for screens, you can set that there. So that's a handy thing when you're trying to get the perfect design. You're like, oh, I got it. And you're like, oh crap, this is in the middle of a screen, or it's too high and I actually don't have that much trim. Let's move through our top view toolbar. Here on the left, we can zoom in, we can zoom out, or the middle one scales to fit. So we can have the perfect size fit given all of the objects we have. Here we can add a layout picture, which I'll come to a little bit. This gives us a design reference. If we want to add a specific shape, I could click here on rectangle, and that gives us a new audience zone with that shape. I'm going to delete it. I can also do a circular, basically a baseball diamond shape. Also add an annual sector, so this would be like a section of amphitheater. I can also do a trapezoid or a right-angled trapezoid and add those in there. This is where I would add a sound source. I click here and I can scroll through the GLL files I have, and we'll walk through how to import those in a little while. Here is where I add a section plane. So again, this is just a visual design reference tool. And here is where I would add another receiver. I can click and it places it on a audience plane or zone. Here's the side view toolbar. So if I have the audience selected, it's going to show me the side view of that and then everything in relation to it. If I have this rear subwoofer selected, it's going to pop over and prioritize that. If I click on this side fill, it's also going to turn a little bit and have that side fill add its profile view. So since it's like semi 3D, you're going to see all this turn a little bit, but we're not able to actually move and orbit in real time with that side view. Going back to our HDL6As, I can click and look at levels. And this shows me the levels over where it's responsible for shooting. This is usually more accurate if I click on the audience zone and that shows me what's going over the whole space. I can also click on frequency response and this shows me with all the active sources I have on, all these speakers are on right now, what the frequency response look like here. So this corresponds with the color. So I have 1 in the front row, 2 in the middle, and 3 in the back. This is very common for me to do. I have my biggest main, I'll put a front row, middle, and back, and sometimes I'll split this and put 2, 3, 4, 5 along here. And then I have this sides at the middle, so that's 4 and 5, or my main reference points that I use to make sure my frequency response is looking good. Then I have time response. You will not see this if you're not in extended mode. So if you missed that part of the video, go to File, Options, go down Environment, and make sure extended mode is on. Time response. This is a really cool feature. This lets you see in relation to the object you have selected versus the receiver, how each of these objects line up from a time perspective. So let's go to number 1, receiver number 1. So that shows me my sources down here. It's a little bit hard to see, but I have all these and each of their lines. So the thing that's going to arrive first is my center K12. I have that right here on the downstage edge, and that's time 0. And that's showing me the thing that's going to arrive second, and that's right above it, is the HDL6A. And then what's going to arrive after that is each of the side fills. So that shows me the timing offset at that specific receiver between all those points. So what's cool about that is it gives me a little bit of a heads up on the delay calculations I'm going to need to be doing in the field at a specific point to make sure my system is time aligned. So you can start to play with that a little bit and get a feel for like, okay, I know that that center field is going to be ahead, so I need to delay it to make sure it aligns with my mains and my other subsystems. Here's our distribution graph. We're going to need to go up to here and click Show Mapping, and that's going to turn on our SPL graphs. And this just shows me the SPL distribution, and I can change the class width. So I can see, is it the divisions of all that. I can see that moving throughout the space. And this is subject to looking at the frequency you have selected up here. And we'll jump through that toolbar in a little bit. By default, I choose 4K with a bandwidth of 3 octaves because I'm primarily concerned with HF coverage when I'm using Ease Focus 3, knowing that the LF is going to change depending on line length and the room acoustics, and I'll adjust that on site. Next, we have our filter section. You got to select a sound source, so any of your speakers, and you're able to adjust EQ on it. On a line array, this is not going to adjust per box. It's just a front end EQ, if you will. But if I have this single K12 on the side, I'm able to adjust filters and that will reflect in the data that I see. I honestly don't touch this very much since I know the frequency response of most of the speakers I'm going to be working with in here anyway, and I fine tune that in the tuning phase. It's only if something I know is like really wrong or different about a speaker I'm forced to use, I might correct it here, but I want to get everything as close as possible with placement, aiming, and array geometry before I ever start to touch EQ. Moving on to the global filter, this applies an EQ across the entire rig. So every single speaker in your rig is going to get this EQ setting. Let's dive a little bit into our audience zones. I'm going to turn off mapping here and click on our main audience zone. I've renamed it here, audience 80 by 60. Might be more descriptive to do 80D by 60W for depth and width. I can add an area within it. So this is all one area right now, but I can click here and it has subdivided it. So I can have front and rear. If I wanted to have, if I knew there was like an aisle in the middle, I can resize these. So I can click and change that. On each of these areas, I'm able to change sitting versus standing height. So if I knew people were sitting in seats in the front and people were out on the grass lawn and I thought they might be standing. So this is just a handy and quick way to be able to subdivide up your audience. I'm going to go ahead and remove this since I'm just treating this as one big group and resize it to be the entire area again. One thing to note is that audience areas cannot be touching each other. So they have to have a little bit of a gap in between. So even if you're just using it as a visual aid and a design thing, you can just make a little tiny 1 foot gap in between each thing, and that's not going to alter your data very much at all. Let's jump into managing our system definition files. This is what Ease Focus 3 refers to as our GLL files. So go here to File, Manage System Definitions, and this lists all of the GLL files that I have imported into my rig. So you can go to a company's website. So go to RCF, you can go to their product page, the HDL6As, and you can scroll to the very bottom and you would find the GLL, download it, and then you go here to File, Import System Definition File, and I have a folder on my computer, and this is what it all looks like. So I got the K12, the HDL6As, the M1201s, click here, open. It's telling me it already has it, and I click OK. But then now you would see this, and when you click Add Sound Source, this pops up that same page, and you're able to import whatever you need into the space. What's great about these is that after you imported it, you don't need to keep track of the other file. It's now tied together with the Ease Focus 3 installation, and is not constantly referencing that other folder which you imported it from. There are 5 different GLL file types. You can have a single speaker, a line array, a single sub, a sub configuration, or a steerable column speaker. Another great feature is you're able to export these. So let's say I wanted to share this file with you and knew that you've never used RCF stuff before. I can click on the HDL6A GLL file, hit export, and then select the location, and you're able to have that. So I don't have to give you a bunch of links to a bunch of different manufacturers. I can just give you and share with you the GLL file directly. Let's look at the Autosplay feature. This only works for line arrays, just to be clear. I have the HDL6A selected here. I'm going to go to our side view. If I click on the Autosplay button right here, I'm going to bring these out here. I'm going to make sure that right audience is selected. Make sure I have all of the boxes selected, and then I can decide what Autosplay strategy I want to use. So what Autosplay does for you is it gives a given line array your audience, and it says, how should I move the geometry of this array to maximize coverage. So conventional just looks at SPL only. So it's just going to manhandle it however it sees fit, is not really worrying about evenness or anything, just to maximize SPL distribution across the space. You have arcuate, which tries to keep consistent angles across each of the boxes. And then spiral. So this has slowly unfurling angles. So it has ever increasing angles between each of the boxes. You can also click here to keep the array tilt angle and make sure that it's not changing how your rigging is sitting. But given if you're changing the angles between boxes, that is also going to change the center of gravity. So this is also hard to really use together. If you're going to use any Autosplay strategy, I would use spiral, not the other two. Now that I think I know what I'm doing now, I really don't ever use this in the real world. But if you just want to see what it does and play with it and see how, maybe just get a second opinion on your array, you can go ahead and give this a go. So I'm going to hit start here and see what this does. So it moved the array down a little bit. So it went to 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 to maximize SPL. What I'm not sure of is if it is aware of the other speakers, or it's saying like, hey, this speaker is solely responsible for the entirety of this audience area, so make it so. I'm going to undo that. It does this weird window resizing thing when I undo. Anyway, so I'm back to the way it was. I knew that I wanted my array to cover from 10 feet into the audience all the way to the back row. So that's 70 feet. And I wanted these fills to cover the first 10 feet of the audience. So I would say if you're having a subdivided strategy of mains and fill systems, I would not use the Autosplay strategy unless you're able to divide up the audience zones and just have the first 10 feet as your front fill area, then have this only pay attention to the back 70 feet in the calculation for your Autosplay strategy. Another feature that's really cool from a contextual standpoint to see how these panes work together is the overlapping regions. I can also click and move any of these tabs anywhere else. So I'm going to click and move levels, hold it over top view, and it moves it up here. And now if I select the lines at any one of the HDL6A boxes, I can see here on the right-hand side that I've confirmed that's the top box. And on the levels tab, as I move down, we can see the region and overlap as I select each of these zones. So if I can see that, hey, there's a little bit of a bump right there on the levels tab, I can see that that's happening in between these two boxes. So that might let me know that, hey, I'm probably gonna have to shade some of the top end on these boxes to make that all work. So I just really like how it's all tied together. It gives me data about each part depending where my mouse is. Now let's look at the meat and heart of Ease Focus 3, the mapping toolbar. So you gotta click Show Mapping for that to happen. And it's useful to turn this off if you're moving a bunch of objects around, so it's not having to recalculate every time you move something. We have type of weighting. So the direct SPL is no weighting at all. Then you have A-weighted. So if you wanted to measure something more from a human loudness standpoint, and you also can look at signal to noise ratio. I really don't use that much. I just leave it on Z. You can choose your frequency as well. So you can obviously go down here to 63 Hertz if you're looking at subs. I leave it on 4K vast majority of the time because that's where I'm concerned of from a coverage standpoint. So that's right in the middle of the top end. And we can look at the bandwidth. I look at a 3-octave weighting at 4K. So that's going to reach down to almost 1.5K, and that's going to reach up to almost 10K. So that gives me what's right in the middle and most present to someone from a coverage and evenness perspective. I will look at other areas, but I'm most concerned about this as far as being even over the course of the audience. I can also look at broadband, so that's the entire frequency spectrum. This isn't really useful data for me ever at all because it's just like one giant blob of like, here's every frequency, the level, which we never listen like that. It's very frequency dependent. Back here at 3 octaves, one of my favorite features in the extended functionality mode is this relative checkbox. So that gives me, I can now select here an average of plus or minus 3 dB. It'll show me green if it's within that. And so I'd say this is a success as a rig because the vast majority of the audience is within plus or minus dB at a 3-octave weighting at 4K. So if I'm looking for one singular sign that tells me, hey, I'm done, I've done a good job, this is it. If I can get plus or minus 3 dB, 3-octave weighting at 4K, without having to do anything super crazy to my array or have a bunch of overlapping stuff. It's not like just make it green and you go. You have to have some understanding of other rules too, but I really like this feature. It is the relative feature. If I uncheck that, the bar here on the right-hand side is going to show me the actual SPL measured at the area, given the current weighting that you have. And that's what's nice about the GLL file is that we're feeding the same input signal to all of these, but I can change the level of all of them in relation to each other because the HDL6A array of 6 boxes is going to be louder than a K12. And so I can actually go here to my K12, and to get that even coverage, I turned it down 9 dB. So we can see I clicked, this properties menu changed, and it gave me different settings about that versus this line array here. I'm going to turn it back onto our averaging and move on to our sources. So this shows me all the sources in the setup. And I've made some groups here. So I've made a fills group. So if I click that, I'll turn off my subs and my flown array. I could click on just the subs, and this is the flown sub behind it. So very handy to quickly see what's going on from an SPL perspective in your array. How you do that is go to Manage Groups, and you can rename or regroup them, or you can have selected sources and say store selected sound sources as groups. So I just selected all of my center fill speakers, and it already knows I made that group, but before it said, hey, do you want to make this a group? I click yes, and I have that here. Then have areas. So this looks at all of your audience areas, and you can show those or have them inactive in your calculations as well. Let's jump into the nitty-gritty of the options menu. Go to File, Options, click on View. The top view shows the origin, so this is your 0 point. I leave that on. The side view, you could also have the same. You can have a ruler, the level lines. So basically, just if you want to look at things a little bit differently, you can jump in the manual and select these. But these are all the default settings. I've never felt a huge need to change them. Then you have grid and snap. So the full grid shows you a checkerboard across the whole thing, which is useful. And the grid size, I leave it on dynamic based on zoom level, or you can have a fixed value. Let's say you always want to tick every 10 feet, and that checkerboard's going to get tighter knit or looser depending on your zoom. And then you have the object snap. So this would align a specific object source or an area to the grid, almost like you're time aligning drums or something like that. And you can have them snap to the grid. And I really like, these are all the default settings. I feel like they work well. Then you have calculation parameters. This is by default on medium. Leave it here. You can put it on highest, but the mapping calculation will take forever, a really, really long time. It's a big jump in CPU usage here. I use pink noise as the input signal type. I have the calculation accuracy on high resolution, and I use power sum. This is by default on complex sum, but since one of the downsides of Ease Focus 3 is that you only get 1 octave resolution on the frequency response graph, and so the complex summing, that comb filtering happens at a much tighter interval than just an octave. And so I don't really care about that. And so I just look at power sum, and then I'm able to look at the time response graph and look at my offsets to kind of know what's going to happen. Let me know if I'm looking at this wrong, but I've never really had a use to see what things look like. It's if you have like 2 subs that are spaced apart, and we'll look at the power alleys, leave this on for the complex sum. But I actually end up doing most of my subarrays in Map 3D, even if I'm using a system in Ease Focus 3, just because it's such low resolution data. Our mapping colors, you can leave this on automatic, and it will adjust to what sound sources you have on relative to each other. Or if you want to have it fixed, you can change that. Signal to noise ratio, I don't use that ever, so you can look more in the manual on that. Levels, this is the level graph that if you have a selected source or audience playing, it's going to show you the levels at your given weighting here at Z weighting 4K 3 octaves, how that moves from front to back. And this is from left to right. The same here, we're looking from left to right. If I took this arrow and flipped it over and said, hey, no, the audience is facing that way, this would move as well. So I would say we're off to, this is showing the current levels with the current speakers that are on. So this is just with my front fill. So this is not a good looking graph. We're at 104 dB all the way down to 90. So that's as this drops all the way down. So that's not great. So let's turn our entire sound system back on by clicking on all sources. And this is much better. This will dynamically adjust. This is 108 dB and it falls down to 103. So 108.5. So this is 5.5 dB from all the way to the front, all the way to the back at that current weighting. So that gives me within my plus or minus 3 dB weighting scale. Target, sure. Back over to options. That was levels. Frequency response. I can change the type of chart that I'm looking at. I usually leave it on line, and automatic scale works great for the time. So that would change what's going on right here. These values here on the left would adjust. Time response, I also keep on automatic scale. I will note here something that I forgot earlier. As you go to your time response, the level of these peaks shows you how strong that source is relative to the others. So if you're having to prioritize at a given receiver point or where you put your measurement microphone to align a system, if you have to delay something, you want to obviously the time align it, but if you had to choose between two, you want to choose the one that is higher end level. So this will also give you a really great look at what is the strongest in level comparative to what's going on. And lastly, we're back down to environment. We looked at here at the beginning, but English, Imperial for me. This is the gain grouping if you want to adjust that with other types of GLL files. The HDL6A doesn't support this, but you can have those in groups if you know that they're on an amp channel and they're in groups of 3, groups of 4, and then make sure you're in an extended mode to get access to all the features. Let's look at the layout picture. I'm going to load up a previous project I did, and this was for a graduation I did in Bud Walton Arena. And you can see here I have more or less like a really basic CAD drawing, and I click right here under the top view menu, and that's layout picture. So I go up here to browse, and I can import a PNG or a JPEG, even a GIF or a bitmap, and it has this here, which is awesome. So I'm able to have this as a visual reference with accurate dimensions, and how you get it to scale are these A and B points. So this will pop up here and you can have that here. And why I was able to choose that is that the stage I knew was, let's see, I ended up knowing that the stage was going to be 20 feet deep. So from point A to point B is 20 feet. So it recognizes that and then scales that image to fit on your prediction file. You can also create a system report. So this is a PDF that you're able to take with you that has all the data from your file. So you want to select your main speaker, then hit side view because it'll have that there. Then click on File, Create Report. And what data do you want included? The audience zones, the receivers, and the current side view. I check all of those. Wham, bam. Let's just put it on the desktop here. Is tutorial report. It'll export that. And it opens it in your default internet web browser. Since I'm in Windows, it's going to attempt to open it in Edge. And here we are. So it has the current weighting and averaging, whether it's on relative or absolute SPL, and it tells all of that right here, which is great. It tells you the temperature you use, the name of the project, the date, which is great. So it gives you a high level view. Then you're able to look at all the sound sources in your project. So which all are there. I have the HDL6As, the 3K12s, the single subwoofer. Gives you the distribution graph. So this shows me over this space that I have a incredibly large percentage of the audience within my plus or minus 3 dB window. And it shows me if they fall within that, they are green, which is great. Then it shows me the specific rigging settings on this box. So I have the HDL6As. It shows me the flybar position, what's there, the best pinpoint to put it in. So that's 1718 to get that rigging point. It shows me the bottom angle, how far that it is above ground. So really great, like you're in the field about to put this thing in the air, you want this report. It gives you the answers to the test. It gives you the rigging angle, so you're not having to dive back into the file. And I can look at my K12s, also gives me them positioning. That's -20 off the y-axis, so that's 20 feet off stage. I have it 5 feet in the air, the equivalent if it was resting on top of a 4-foot stage. So I did that. So it shows me what's going on, shows me the rigging height of my sub, which is right here. It's 23 feet. I'm not sure if this sub could even fly, but I just chose it for this. And my audience dimensions that, hey, it's an 80-foot deep thing, and I did it at ear height. You can also export a picture. So I can right-click on any graph once it's done loading and copy picture to clipboard or save picture to. I'm going to put this on the desktop again, and it's saved as a bitmap. Let's try a different file format that's a little bit more useful. Put it as a JPEG. Boom. And now it's here. Got it on the desktop, and now I have a picture of that graph. It doesn't show, I guess it has some of the axes, some of the data. So I don't use this all the time, but just know you can do that if you have a very specific view or want to share something quickly. Now let me touch on a little bit more of the specific settings that we're able to change with some of our sound sources. I have our HDL6A rig selected here, and I'm able to change the number of boxes in the array, so I can add more. It shows me its total weight. If I go here to filter settings, this is going to be GLL file dependent. On the back of the HDL6As, you have a little push button that can make it flat, or on HF boost, so that you can see what that's going to do with your prediction. I'll go back here to rigging. This is how I change the display angles between the boxes. Here's the gain between the boxes. So these are all at 0. I recommend you keep them there. And then you can change the type of box that's here. So in HDL6A, you can also add HDL12 AS, which I believe is their flown subwoofer. So you can put that on top and have others hanging below it, which is pretty cool. Now, if I go over to a K12, it's going to have a different menu here. And what I can change on that is the gain. I can invert the polarity, and I can just delay time. So that's a DSP that's built into the speaker. So that gives me that ability to change that. So I can increase or decrease delay, and that would change how things are showing up on my time response graph if I were to go ahead and put in the time alignment delay value to make this line up. So let's simulate that here. So if we have receiver 1, my HDL6A is arriving here at, let's see, -1 milliseconds ahead. And then I have that center K12 is almost at -11. So it's like, let's call it a 10 millisecond delta. So I'm going to select that center one. Show properties. If I delayed it by 10 milliseconds, we can see here that now I got a lot closer. So this is within a millisecond, and I can fine tune that so that you'll see that change if the GLL file has the ability to change the delay time and show that up in your time response graph. All right, that's all the features you need to know. Now let's go and make a new one from scratch and attempt to basically make what we have here just so we can get comfortable with those tools. When you fire it up, it's going to pop up and give you this big audience zone. Right now it's 328 feet deep. So basically I think it gave you a football field is what it starts off with. So we're going to, or a soccer pitch if you're across the pond. I'm going to make it 80 feet deep. 60 feet wide. Make sure you have your unit selected. Plenty of times I've done a new install of ease and it defaults to metric, and I do this design. I'm like, why is this all weird? I'm like, oh, I'm not on Imperial. Zoom to fit here. So it's 80 feet deep by 60 feet wide, and then I want a 20 foot deep by 30 foot wide stage. I'm gonna reach for my section plane tool here and draw a line. Usually just kind of guesstimate, and I got it right, so that's 30 feet. I want to draw from here to here, and that's 20 feet. Great, I'm pretty good at guessing today. Here, draw another one. There are hotkeys here that I'm not using because some of them don't transfer because of Mac and parallels and stuff. So I'm kind of a click monkey on this one. You usually love learning hotkeys, but I'm just going to click around right here. And I'll also say that we are 10 feet from the stage, and how I can make sure that is that I've looked down here and this shows me my units right here. That's 5 feet. So I need 2 ticks, and I am at 2 little square ticks at the front. So I get an 80 by 60 audience and a 20 foot by 30 foot stage. I don't have the stage height right here since it's not a real object, but I'm usually using this for the top down view metric. So now let's add my HDL6A array, my mains. I'm going to click right here on sound source, RCF, scroll up, import that. And then it's going to want me to click somewhere. So I'm going to click. And when the mapping mode is off, this little side triangle thing shows you its coverage. It's a 100-degree box, so this is a 100-degree angle from here to here. Super handy. Click that guy. I'm going to adjust the box count down to 6. That's what I got on the truck. I'm going to put its trim height at 25 feet right now. I made a little bit of boo-boo already. I'm going to make sure my downstage edge is right here at the front, not at the front of the audience. I'm going to move all this stuff here. All right, now I've got this guy 1 foot upstage, is 25 feet in the air. I can look at my side view, and there it is, pointing nowhere useful. But I can click and drag this top one and already start to aim it down. I like to have this one. I've decided to do 3 groups of 2 boxes. I'm going to go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, 5, 7. I would love to talk in a later video about line array theory and why I did all this, but today we're just focusing on ease focus 3. We'll get into the line array design a little bit later on. So I call this a rough, good start for what's going on with that. I want to add in my fill speakers. Let's go here to QSC. K12.2, okay. I'm gonna put this here on the edge. I want to put it 5 foot trim height. Maybe it's on a little speaker stand or something. I can change that if I want. I'm gonna angle it outwards a little bit. I can Command C, Command V. That key command does work. Put it here on the outside. Just negative 11.18 on the angle, and those are pointed out. Now I'm going to add a subwoofer. Put it here behind that array. 23 feet in the air. 6 foot behind, so it's sitting right behind that sub, and I need my center fill speaker. Command C, Command V. And sometimes it's easier just to type in the values. I know it's 0 on my x-axis, 0 on my y. Let's right on the origin, 0 out the horizontal splay. It's 5 feet in the air, so it's good to go. I knew from my previous file to shade that guy down 12 dB. Click on this guy. Shade it down 9 dB. Shade him down 9 dB. Shade my sub down 6 dB. All rough estimates from the previous file. Now let's make these groups. So all sources, I have them selected. Just select the HDL6As. Manage groups, store this as a source. Mains. Store this as a group. Fills. Select just my sub. Now I have all these here. I can quickly bounce between them all. Now I'm going to select all of them, hit my mapping, and I'm pretty close to where I was. Needs a little bit of fine tuning, but vast majority of my audience is within a plus or minus 3 dB span or 6 dB total. My name is Michael Curtis. Thank you so much for watching today. If you would let me know below, what was your biggest aha moment? Maybe you've been struggling with the software and something was unlocked for you, or maybe you're really comfortable with it. Tell me what gig you have coming up next and how you're using this to get great results before you show up for load-in. Thank you again so much for watching. Make sure and grab my audio toolkit at the link below, and I'll catch you next week.